An ancient sailor had no satellites to guide his wooden ship across the endless sea. He still knew exactly where he was. This is the story of how our ancestors measured the entire world without a single modern instrument. By the end, you will understand the forgotten science that let ancient mapmakers chart continents with stunning accuracy. How did a simple stick's shadow reveal the size of the Earth? What secret patterns in the ocean waves could lead to an invisible island? We will uncover the ingenious answers. What does it truly mean to navigate a world you cannot fully see? That sailor's knowledge began not with a map, but with a single revolutionary idea. The world was not a flat, endless plain. It was a sphere. This seems obvious to us now, but for early thinkers, it was a staggering leap of logic. How could you possibly know the shape of something so vast while standing on a tiny part of it? The answer came not from traveling the globe, but from looking up at the sky. Ancient Greek philosophers, men like Pythagoras and later Aristotle, pieced together the clues. They noticed that during a lunar eclipse, when the Earth passes between the sun and moon, the shadow it casts on the lunar surface is always a perfect curved arc. A flat disk might cast an oval or a straight-edged shadow, but only a sphere creates that consistent, rounded silhouette against the moon. Then there was the horizon. Watch a ship sail away. It doesn't just shrink into a dot. It vanishes piece by piece, the hull disappearing first, followed by the mast, as if it's sliding down a gentle hill. On a perfectly flat world, the entire ship would simply grow smaller until it faded from sight. These observations were quiet but undeniable. They pointed to a profound truth. The Earth was a round body hanging in space, a single object that could, in theory, be measured. This belief was the essential first piece of the puzzle. Without accepting a spherical Earth, there was no point in trying to calculate its size or accurately chart its surface. It was the philosophical foundation, the blank canvas upon which every ancient mapmaker, in their mind, began to draw. But a philosophical idea alone could not draw a map. To chart a sphere, you needed numbers, you needed a scale. The first tool to provide this was astonishingly simple, a vertical stick planted firmly in the ground. This was the Gnomon, the world's first scientific instrument. Its power lay not in the stick itself, but in the dark line it cast upon the Earth. Ancient observers noticed something profound. At the exact moment the sun reached its highest point each day, what we call local noon, the shadow was at its shortest. More importantly, the angle of that shadow changed predictably as you traveled north or south. If you stood directly under the sun, at what we now call the equator, the Gnomon would cast almost no shadow at noon, but journey north and the shadow would grow longer, pointing directly toward the north celestial pole. This was the key to latitude. By carefully measuring the shadow's length at the summer solstice, when the sun was at its absolute peak, an observer could get a fixed, reproducible number. That number was a geographic address, a coordinate telling you how far you were from the equator. It was a way to pin a location to the curve of the Earth using nothing but sunlight and geometry. The true genius of this method, however, was not in finding your own location, but in comparing it with another. This is where the story turns to one of history's great intellectual triumphs. In the 3rd century before the Common Era, a scholar named Eratosthenes was running the legendary library of Alexandria. He received a curious report from the city of Syene, far to the south. It was said that at noon on the summer solstice, the sun shone directly down the deepest wells, and vertical pillars cast no shadow at all. The sun was perfectly overhead. In Alexandria, however, Eratosthenes observed that his Gnomon still cast a definite, measurable shadow. He realized those two observations, made at the same moment but at different latitudes, were pieces of a planetary puzzle. He measured the angle of the shadow in Alexandria. It was about 7 degrees, which is 1/50th of a full circle. He then had the distance between the two cities measured by professional pacers. Once he knew that distance, the logic was beautifully clear. If 7 degrees of the Earth's curve corresponded to the ground distance between Alexandria and Syene, then a full 360-degree circle must be 50 times that distance. His final calculation gave him the Earth's circumference. With a stick, a shadow, and a brilliant deduction, Eratosthenes had measured the world. His figure was within a few % of the value we know today. This was not magic. It was the application of pure, elegant geometry to the clues written in light and shadow. The Gnomon transformed a philosophical sphere into a measurable object, giving the first mapmakers the most vital piece of information of all, the true size of their canvas. Eratosthenes had given the world its scale, but a single number was not a map. To translate that grand circumference into a usable chart, you needed a constant reference point, a fixed star in the ever-turning sky. This is where the tools of the heavens came into play. While the Gnomon was perfect for a stable observatory, the open ocean demanded something more. A sailor on a pitching deck could not rely on a shadow that danced with every wave. He needed to capture the angle of a star directly. The solution emerged from a family of ingenious devices, each designed to bring the sky down to earth. The simplest was the camel, used by Arab navigators in the Indian Ocean. It was nothing more than a small rectangular wooden plate attached to a knotted string. The sailor would hold one end of the string between his teeth, stretch it out to arm's length, and align the top of the plate with the North Star. The point where the string met his hand, marked by a specific knot, told him his latitude. It was elegant in its simplicity, a personal, physical connection between a sailor, his ship, and the pole star. But for greater precision, especially under the bright, harsh sun, more sophisticated tools were developed. The mariner's astrolabe was a heavy brass ring, weighted to hang vertically despite a ship's motion. Its center held a pivoting sighting arm called an alidade. The navigator would line up the sun through the pinholes on this arm, and where the arm pointed on the engraved degree scale around the ring gave the sun's altitude above the horizon. This was a demanding skill, requiring steady hands and a keen eye on a moving deck, but it yielded a crucial number. By knowing the exact altitude of Polaris or the midday sun on a given date and consulting prepared tables, a navigator could calculate his latitude with remarkable accuracy. He was, in effect, reading his north-south position directly from the cosmos. The sky itself became a grid with the North Star as its central pivot. These tools transformed navigation from a form of guesswork into a repeatable science. A captain was no longer just following coastlines or watching for familiar birds. He could point his ship into the open, trackless deep and know with growing confidence how far north or south he had traveled. The challenge that remained, the true nightmare of ancient seafaring, was figuring out how far east or west he had gone. For that, the silent stars could not help him. He would have to learn to read the secrets of the ocean itself. Latitude could be read from the stars, but longitude remained a ghost in the machine. While sailors wrestled with that unsolved puzzle on the open sea, a different kind of precision was being achieved on solid ground. Here, the challenge was not finding your place on the globe, but mastering the landscape itself, bending it to human will with aqueducts, roads, and vast property grids. For this, the ancients developed engineering instruments of stunning sophistication. Among the most important was the dioptra. Picture a telescope, but invented 2 millennia before the telescope. It was a sighting tube, carefully mounted on a flat, circular plate that could be rotated and tilted with finely threaded screws. By peering through this tube and aligning it with a distant target, the peak of a hill, a marker on the opposite bank of a river. An engineer could measure both horizontal and vertical angles with extraordinary precision. This was the theodolite of the ancient world. With it, you could trace a perfectly straight line for a road across rolling countryside, or calculate the gentle, consistent slope needed for an aqueduct to flow for miles without stalling or rushing. It turned the art of construction into a science of angles, but angles alone were not enough. To build something that spanned great distances, you first needed to establish a true level plane. For this, Roman engineers relied on the chorobates. This was a wooden bench, often 20 feet long, with a shallow trough carved along its top. The surveyor would fill this trough with water, the world's most obedient level. By sighting along the surface of the water, or using dangling plumb lines attached to the frame, he could confirm that both ends of the instrument were perfectly horizontal. If the water touched a marked line at both ends, the ground beneath was level. It was a tool of beautiful, practical simplicity, using the immutable law of gravity and the flatness of still water to tame the uneven earth. With the chorobates setting the plane and the dioptra measuring the angles, teams could plot the course of an aqueduct with a gradient so slight it dropped only a few feet over an entire mile. This was not guesswork, it was measurement refined to an art form. These tools represent a crucial, often overlooked branch of ancient science. While philosophers gazed at the stars to measure the earth, engineers were down in the dirt, applying the same geometric principles to human-scale projects. They bridged the immense gap between celestial theory and terrestrial reality. The precision they achieved on the ground in the straight lines of Roman roads that still define European landscapes, in the soaring arcades of aqueducts, proves their understanding was not just theoretical. It was concrete, practical, and built to last. Yet, for all this mastery over land, the greatest frontier and the greatest mystery remained the trackless ocean. Out there, without fixed landmarks, how could anyone know how far they had traveled east or west? The solution would not be found in a tool, but in a careful, almost poetic observation of the world itself. The ocean at night offered no landmarks, only a dome of stars turning slowly overhead. For the ancient navigator, this was not a void but a vast living chart. His most vital skill was not using an instrument but remembering the sky's precise dance. He knew that certain stars, like old friends, rose from the same point on the horizon each night, traveled a specific arc, and set in a predictable place. By aligning his vessel with these celestial gateways, he could steer a true course across thousands of miles of open water. The Phoenicians, masters of the Mediterranean, relied on the constellation Ursa Major, the Great Bear, to hold their northward line. But they understood this was a seasonal art. The starry panorama shifted throughout the year, so the reliable guide in spring was not the same as in autumn. Their mental almanac connected specific star patterns with specific sailing seasons and destinations, turning the abstract calendar into a map written in light. This deep, generational knowledge transformed the night from a time of peril into a time of perfect guidance. Yet the most astonishing celestial navigators of all may have been the Polynesian voyagers of the Pacific. They faced a challenge of a different scale entirely, crossing an ocean so vast that continents seemed like myths. Their genius lay in a concept called the star path. They did not just follow a single star which moves too quickly. Instead, they would memorize a sequence, a line of stars that rose one after another from the same point on the horizon, like a celestial picket fence. As one star climbed too high to use as a reference, the next in the sequence would appear at the correct bearing. By sighting down this endless revolving chain, a navigator could keep his canoe pointed toward a distant island for nights on end. They also used zenith stars. These are stars that pass directly overhead at a specific latitude. A voyager would know that when a particular bright star was at its zenith, he was on the latitude of his home island. Sailing north or south until that star passed directly overhead was like finding a celestial address in the empty sea. This was a science of memory, observation, and profound intimacy with the cosmos. It required no brass or glass, only a lifetime of learning passed from elder to student. The night sky was their compass, their chart, and their library, all woven into stories and songs that carried the directions for an entire people. With the stars to guide their latitude and star paths to guide their bearing, these voyagers could conceptualize routes across the planet's greatest wilderness. But even the stars could not solve the final, maddening riddle of the sea, knowing how far you had traveled along that invisible line. For that, they had to listen to the ocean itself. The stars could tell a sailor his latitude, but they held their silence on the question of distance. Beneath the celestial clock, the ocean remained a trackless expanse, and crossing it required a different kind of reckoning, one born of estimation, patience, and relentless record-keeping. This was the art of dead reckoning, the mathematical heartbeat of every long voyage. It began with a simple, terrifying premise. If you know where you started, and you can track the direction you have sailed and the distance you have covered, you can plot your new position on the chart. It sounds straightforward, but on the open sea, every variable was a guess shrouded in chaos. The first and most vital number to find was speed. For centuries, sailors used a method so basic it became embedded in our language. A sailor would throw a weighted piece of wood, the log, over the stern, attached to a long rope with knots tied at regular intervals. As the ship pulled away, the rope would pay out through his fingers. He would count how many knots slipped past during the time it took a sandglass to empty, usually about 30 seconds. If 5 knots passed, the ship was moving at 5 knots. This humble act is why we still measure nautical speed in knots today. It was a direct physical connection between the sailor's hand and the ship's motion through the water. But speed was only one part of the equation. Direction was another, read from a wavering compass or the night sky, and time was measured by turning sandglasses, each one marking a watch. All of this data, every shift in the wind, every change of course, every estimated knot of speed, had to be meticulously recorded. On English ships, this was often done on a traverse board, a circular wooden plaque with holes radiating out like a spiderweb. Each hour, the helmsman would peg a hole to show the course sailed. After a full watch, the officers would average these often zigzagging directions and calculate the day's run. It was a system of constant, grinding arithmetic. The navigator's logbook became the ship's memory, a fragile ledger of guesses against the immense indifference of the sea. The problem, of course, was error. A slight misjudgment of current, a knot counted too fast, a sandglass that drained a moment slow, a magnetic variation not accounted for. These tiny mistakes were harmless for a day, but over weeks and months they compounded silently, like a whisper growing into a shout. A ship could be dozens, even hundreds of miles from where its captain believed it to be, sailing with confidence into emptiness or peril. Dead reckoning was not about pinpoint accuracy. It was about building a probable position, a best guess in a world of unknowns. It filled the agonizing blanks between the rare moments of celestial certainty, creating a continuous, if blurry, line across the map. It was an act of profound faith in human calculation, a fragile thread of logic stretched across the abyss. And yet, even with this thread, the greatest fear was losing it entirely, of the calculations diverging so far from reality that the ship became truly lost. To prevent that final disaster, navigators needed something more. They needed to listen for the land itself long before it ever came into view. The silent sea could hide its secrets, but the land offered puzzles of a different kind. A wide river blocked an army's path. A distant mountain peak stood defiant against the sky. How could a commander or a mapmaker know the distance to that far shore or the true height of that summit without undertaking a perilous, perhaps impossible, journey to measure it directly? The answer was not to cross the distance, but to frame it within a triangle of pure logic. This was the birth of triangulation, the geometric magic that allowed the ancients to measure the unreachable. The principle was elegant in its simplicity. First, you establish a baseline on your side of the obstacle, a line of known, carefully measured length. You then stand at one end of this baseline and sight the distant object, the peak of the mountain, a tower on the opposite bank. Using an instrument like a diopter, you measure the precise angle between your baseline and your line of sight. Then you walk to the other end of your baseline and repeat the process. You now have a triangle. You know the length of one side, your baseline, and you know the two angles adjacent to it. With those three pieces of information, the entire shape of the triangle is locked in place. The unknown distances, the width of the river or the horizontal distance to the mountain, could be solved using the new mathematical science of trigonometry. Greek mathematicians like Hipparchus in the 2nd century before the Common Era were pioneers here. They developed early trigonometric tables, relationships between the angles and sides of a triangle, that turned this geometric puzzle into a calculable equation. Let's make this concrete. Imagine you are a Roman military surveyor. Your legion needs to bridge a river. You cannot swim across with a measuring rope under enemy arrows. So, on your safe bank, you lay out a baseline exactly 500 paces long, marked by two sturdy poles. You go to the first pole and aim your sighting instrument at a distinctive tree on the far bank, noting the angle. Then you move to the second pole and sight the same tree, getting a different angle. You now have your two angles and your known side. Consulting your trigonometric tables or using geometric constructions, you can calculate the distance to the tree with remarkable accuracy, all without getting your feet wet. This same principle, scaled up, could measure the height of a mountain by creating a triangle in the vertical plane, or determine the distance between two cities by building a chain of interconnected triangles across the landscape. This was the true power of the method. A single measured baseline, perhaps only a few miles long, could become the foundation for an entire geodetic network. Surveyors would move from that first triangle to the next, using each newly calculated side as the baseline for a subsequent triangle, marching across countries, over hills and valleys, weaving a vast, invisible web of precise measurement over the continent. It transformed mapping from a collection of disconnected sketches into a cohesive, mathematically rigorous system. Every city, every mountain, every bend in a coastline could be given a relative position defined by angles and distances, pinned to the Earth's curve not by guesswork, but by the unshakable laws of geometry. The unreachable had been conquered by reason. Yet, for all this growing precision on land, a final, colossal challenge remained at sea, a problem so difficult it would baffle navigators for centuries and drive the invention of a clock that changed the world. Geometry could solve for a distant mountain, but it could not capture the smell of a safe harbor or the sound of breakers on a hidden reef. For that, you needed stories. Long before a single line was drawn on parchment, the world was mapped in memory and recounted in the shared language of experience. This was the domain of the itinerary and the periplous, the verbal charts that guided countless journeys. An itinerary was the backbone of land travel, a meticulous, almost rhythmic list. Imagine a Roman merchant preparing his caravan for the long trek to the east. His most precious possession might not be his silk or spices, but a worn scroll. On it he would find a sequence of names, each one a lifeline. From Antioch to Palmyra, 120 Roman miles. From Palmyra to Dura Europos, 90 miles. The list continued, noting not just distances measured in paces or days' travel, but the vital details in between, the reliable wells, the fortified way stations where soldiers kept the peace, the river fords that dried up by summer. This was not a map to look at, it was a script to perform, turning an uncertain wilderness into a series of known, manageable stages. the distance between points was often given in travel time, a unit of measurement that acknowledged the real world, where a mile over flat plain was not the same as a mile up a rocky pass. For the sailor, the equivalent guide was the Periplous, a Greek word meaning a sailing around. These were coastal pilots, written descriptions that narrated a journey as if you were standing at the prow. A Periplous would not begin with a latitude, it would begin with a landmark. From the great river's mouth, sail east for 2 days until you see the white cliffs. Round them carefully, for the currents are strong. A day's sail further brings you to a bay with a spring of fresh water on the northern shore. The people there trade ivory for iron. It was a continuous, practical story. It detailed safe anchorages warned of sandbars, noted which headlands were home to friendly villages and which were best avoided. One of the most famous that survives is the Periplous of the Eratosthenes Sea, a 1st century guide to the trade routes of the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, and the Indian Ocean. It reads like a merchant's confidential briefing, listing the ports of call from Egypt to India, what goods each kingdom desired, and what they had to offer in return. It mentions the seasonal monsoon winds, the key to crossing the open Indian Ocean, with the casual authority of someone who has ridden them many times. These documents were living things, constantly amended with new information from the latest voyage. When a ship returned, its captain's log, filled with notes on strange currents or a newly discovered island, would be cross-checked with the existing Periplous. If the information held, it was incorporated, refining the collective knowledge. This was crowdsourced navigation, centuries before the term existed. The true power of these textual guides was their synthesis. They wove together the hard numbers from dead reckoning with the qualitative wisdom of survival. They told you not only how far, but what to expect when you got there. They transformed the lonely act of exploration into a communal project, where every traveler's report, every merchant's tip, and every sailor's close call became a sentence in a growing manual for the world. This was how knowledge moved, not just in the minds of scholars, but in the hands of those who lived by it, passed from pilot to pilot, scroll to scroll, creating a map that was written not in ink, but in shared memory. And as these written logs grew more detailed, they began to yearn for a visual form, a single image that could hold the entire story. A coastline was more than a line on a map, it was a face against the sky. For a sailor navigating without precise longitude, recognizing that face from miles out at sea was the difference between a safe harbor and a deadly mistake. This was the art of coastal profiling, a skill where the human eye and memory became the most sophisticated instruments aboard. A navigator would not simply look for land, he would study its silhouette, the unique pattern it cut into the horizon. He committed to memory the specific way a certain headland sloped, the distinct notch between 2 hills that looked like a camel's back, the exact sequence in which a series of river mouths opened along the shore. These were not random shapes, they were signatures. A sailor returning from a long voyage would scan the hazy line ahead, and as the details resolved, a particular combination of peaks and dips would click into place in his mind. That was the Bay of Lepanto. That sharp, tooth-like cliff marked the entrance to the Corinthian Gulf. This visual literacy was painstakingly cultivated, often from childhood. Experienced pilots would take apprentices ashore to high vantage points, not to look at the sea, but to look back at the land from the perspective they would have on the water. They would point out the permanent features, the ones that did not change with the seasons, the rocky outcrops and mountain profiles that would remain constant while beaches shifted and trees grew. This knowledge was then reinforced through stories and songs. A rhythmic chant might describe the journey, past the 3 sisters, the hills in a row, then the lone sentinel where the freshwater flows, embedding the visual sequence into an oral tradition. It was a map drawn not on parchment but in the shared imagination of a community of sailors. The horizon itself became a chart, and every distinct contour was a labeled waypoint. This technique reached its zenith with the Portolan charts of the medieval Mediterranean. These remarkable maps, drawn for practical use at sea, often depicted coastlines with an almost exaggerated attention to the shapes of bays and promontories, as if the cartographer was drawing the skyline he remembered, not an abstract line. They were less concerned with the accurate interior geography of a country and intensely focused on the view from the deck of a ship. To use such a chart, a pilot would orient it not with north, but with the line of coast he was following, turning the parchment to match the world outside his window. This seamless union of art, memory, and survival meant a sailor could possess a chart of 1,000 miles of coastline in his mind's eye, a living library of silhouettes that told him exactly where he was long before he could read the name on a map. It was a profound dialogue between the voyager and the vanishing edge of the world. Yet for all its power, this method had one glaring limitation. It only worked when you could see the land. For the final and most difficult leg of the journey, the transition from the open ocean to the first sight of that saving silhouette, navigators needed a deeper kind of signal, one that traveled far beyond the horizon. The silhouette of a coast was a fact, but what lay beyond it was often a story. For the ancient mapmaker, the blank spaces on his parchment were not just voids to be filled with measurement. They were invitations for the imagination, where the hard-won data from travelers met the deep currents of myth and belief. A map was never just a chart of the known world. It was a portrait of how that world was understood, a tapestry woven from equal threads of observation and legend. Consider the accounts of Herodotus, the Greek historian often called the father of history. He traveled widely and collected reports with a scholar's curiosity, but his work is filled with wonders that defy geography. He writes of giant ants in India that dig for gold, and of northern tribes who sleep for 6 months of the year. Were these lies? Not necessarily. They were likely the result of a game of geographic telephone, where a traveler's description of marmots digging burrows or the long Arctic night was filtered through layers of interpretation and awe before reaching the writer's ear. The mapmaker, hearing such a report, had a choice. He could dismiss it as nonsense, or he could incorporate it as the best available information about a distant realm. Often he chose to include it, giving the unknown a shape, even if that shape was a monster. This is vividly clear in medieval world maps like the famous Hereford Mappa Mundi. Jerusalem sits at the center, not because it was geographically central, but because it was spiritually central. The edges of the world are populated with the fantastical creatures described by Pliny the Elder, like the Blemii, men with faces on their chests, or the Cyopods, who used a single giant foot as a sunshade. These were not mere decorations. They served a symbolic purpose, marking the boundaries of the ordered Christian world and the mysterious, often perilous, lands that lay beyond divine grace. The map was a moral and theological document as much as a geographical one. Even a practical guide like the Roman tabula Peutingeriana, a sprawling itinerary map of the empire's road network, includes symbolic illustrations. At the very edge of the known world, in the distant east, it places the image of a temple to the sun. This wasn't a navigational aid for a postal courier. It was a cultural landmark, a reminder of the empire's reach toward the legendary and divine. This fusion served a profound human need. The terrifying emptiness of Terra Incognita was more manageable if it was populated, even with dangers. A sea filled with sea serpents was a sea that had rules, however fearsome. A forest that was home to a mythical beast was a forest that could be understood within the stories of the culture. By integrating myth, the mapmaker did something remarkable. He turned the unknown from a formless void into a place with character and meaning. It was a way of claiming the entire world, measured and unmeasured alike, for the human imagination. The map became a canvas where the precision of the Gnomon met the poetry of the epic, reminding us that every measurement was ultimately interpreted by a mind filled with its own wonders and fears. And as these composite maps circulated, they began to create a new problem, a tension between the beautiful story and the provable fact. A map filled with both measurement and myth created a powerful tension. It was the brilliant scholar Claudius Ptolemy, working in the great library of Alexandria during the 2nd century, who sought to resolve it. He aimed to replace storytelling with system, to build a map of the entire known world from the ground up using nothing but numbers and geometry. His monumental work, the Geographia, was not a map itself but something far more powerful, a complete instruction manual for creating one. Imagine giving someone a list of every city's street address and the rules for drawing the roads between them. That was Ptolemy's gift to cartography. He understood that to accurately place any location on the spherical Earth, you needed a universal grid, a set of imaginary lines that could assign a unique number to every point. He formalized the concepts of latitude and longitude into this precise coordinate system. Latitude, the distance north or south of the equator, was relatively straightforward, measured by the sun and stars. But longitude, the distance east or west, was the ancient world's grandest puzzle. Ptolemy's solution was pragmatic. He designated a prime meridian, a line of 0 longitude, running through what he believed were the westernmost lands, the Canary Islands. Every other location was then given a coordinate, a pair of numbers estimating its position within this global grid. He catalogued over 8,000 places from Britain to Sri Lanka, each with its assigned latitude and longitude. This was an act of breathtaking ambition, an attempt to digitize the world 13 centuries before the computer, yet his true genius lay in the next step. He knew that transferring these spherical coordinates onto a flat sheet of parchment would inevitably distort the truth of the Earth's curve, so he provided detailed instructions for map projections, geometric methods to flatten the globe. He described conic projections where the surface of the sphere is projected onto a cone, which is then cut and unfurled, preserving the accuracy of continental shapes in the mid-latitudes where most of the known world lay. This was the apex of ancient scientific thought, a reproducible framework that separated the act of observation from the art of depiction. For over 1,000 years, Ptolemy's Geographia was the absolute authority. Medieval mapmakers, rediscovering his texts, treated his coordinates as gospel, carefully plotting his long-lost cities and coastlines onto new parchments. The irony, of course, was that his data was filled with significant errors. His estimate of the Earth's circumference was too small, borrowed from a later, less accurate calculation than Eratosthenes'. This made his world appear stretched, overestimating the east-west span of Asia and inadvertently suggesting the Atlantic Ocean was a much narrower sea than it truly was. These very mistakes, however, cemented his legacy in an unexpected way. Centuries later, they would whisper a tantalizing, dangerous promise to an explorer named Christopher Columbus, suggesting a westward voyage to Asia was far shorter than it really was. Ptolemy's system was flawed, but its power was undeniable. He had provided the syntax, the grammatical rules, for the language of maps. He transformed cartography from a collection of local sketches and travelers' tales into a global science, a single, coherent argument about the shape of the world, written in lines of latitude and longitude. It was a system so elegant and logical that it would guide and constrain the imagination of every mapmaker who followed, right up to the dawn of a new age of discovery. Ptolemy's grid gave the world a beautiful mathematical skeleton, but one of its two vital coordinates remained a ghost. Latitude was a fact you could read from the sky. Longitude was a riddle written in time. To know how far east or west you had sailed, you needed to know two moments simultaneously: the local time at your current position and the precise time at a fixed reference point like your home port. The difference between those two times, translated into degrees, gives your longitudinal separation. 1 hour of time difference equals 15 degrees of longitude. The concept was simple geometry, but the practical requirement was a kind of magic, a clock that could keep perfect time on a rolling, salt-soaked, months-long voyage. This was the great unsolved puzzle, and its absence warped the maps of the world for centuries. Without it, a captain sailing west from Europe knew his latitude from the North Star, but he had no true idea how much ocean lay between him and Asia. His east-west position was a guess, growing more uncertain with every passing day. Mapmakers, lacking this data, were forced to estimate, often stretching continents to fit the accounts of travelers or compressing vast oceans based on flawed calculations. The result was a world where the Mediterranean might be drawn with astonishing accuracy, while the shape of Asia was distorted beyond recognition, its eastern coast drifting into speculative fantasy. The human and economic cost of this ignorance was staggering. Ships missed their landfalls by hundreds of miles, running low on supplies or smashing into unexpected shores. The search for a solution became one of history's great scientific quests. Some attempts focused on the heavens, using the moon as a celestial clock hand. The lunar distance method involved measuring the precise angle between the moon and a bright star, then consulting incredibly complex tables to deduce the time at a prime meridian. It was theoretically sound but practically a nightmare, requiring calm seas, clear skies, and hours of error-prone calculation, far too difficult for the average ship's master. Other ideas bordered on desperation, like the belief in a magnetic compass that would point not just to north, but directly to a specific port, a kind of mystical homing beacon. None of these methods provided the reliable, daily answer sailors desperately needed. The core problem was fundamental: a clock that could survive the violent motions, humidity, and temperature swings of a sea journey did not exist. Pendulum clocks, the best timekeepers on land, were useless on a moving ship. The solution required not just a new instrument, but a new understanding of precision engineering. This single, stubborn problem meant that for over 1,000 years, from Ptolemy's era until the 18th century, the east-west dimension of the world remained a blur. A navigator could know his north-south position with confidence, but his east-west position was always slipping away, a silent drift recorded only in the growing anxiety of his crew and the accumulating error on his chart. It was the final, formidable wall between the ancient art of wayfinding and the modern science of navigation. And the man who would finally breach that wall was not a king or a general, but a humble carpenter from Yorkshire, obsessed with a single, perfect idea. The final wall was not a failure of imagination, but a stubborn problem of physics. For centuries, the solution to longitude remained locked inside a perfect clock, one that could survive the chaos of the sea. The man who would build that clock was a self-taught carpenter and clockmaker named John Harrison. His obsession began not in a royal observatory, but in the workshop of a humble Yorkshire village. Harrison understood that the enemy of timekeeping at sea was not just motion, but the brutal changes in temperature and humidity that warped the delicate metals of a clock's mechanism. Pendulums were useless on a rolling deck, so he turned to a different principle, the balance spring. His life's work became a series of marine timekeepers, each one more radical and refined than the last. His first, known as H1, was a massive, intricate machine of brass and wood, containing innovations to counteract motion and temperature changes. It was a marvel, but Harrison knew it was only a beginning. He spent decades perfecting his designs, shrinking them, simplifying them. His fourth and final timekeeper, H4, looked nothing like a ship's clock. It was a large, elegant pocket watch, 5 inches in diameter. In a series of grueling sea trials to the West Indies, it performed a miracle. It lost only 5 seconds over the entire 81-day voyage, an error in longitude of less than 2 miles. Harrison had done it. He had tamed time itself, capturing the precise hour of a home port in a box and carrying it faithfully around the world. The implications were earth-shattering. With a reliable chronometer, a navigator could now take a noon sight to find local time, compare it to the time shown on his Harrison watch, set to Greenwich, and calculate his exact longitude in minutes. The ghost in the machine had been given a steady, ticking heartbeat. This was the final, crucial instrument, the one that fused celestial observation with mechanical genius. It completed the ancient quest, providing the second coordinate that had eluded mapmakers since Eratosthenes first measured the Earth's shadow. The world, at long last, could be fully fixed in place, both north and south, east and west, on a single, reliable grid. Yet, even as this new precision was being born, we must look back at one of the most peculiar and practical maps ever created. A document that reveals how the Romans mastered their world with a completely different kind of logic. Stretched across a parchment over 22 feet long but only 1 foot high, the Peutinger map looks nothing like a modern atlas. It is a bizarre, compressed panorama of the Roman world, from Britain to India, where the Mediterranean Sea is a thin, horizontal ribbon, and Italy is bent sideways like a boot kicked over. This was never meant to be a geographical snapshot. It was a functional diagram, a roadmap for the empire's vast bureaucracy and travelers. Think of it not as a map but as a subway schematic. A modern metro map does not show the true, winding curves of the tracks above ground. It straightens them into clean, colored lines to show you the sequence of stations and where to change trains. The Peutinger map does exactly this for the Roman road network. It sacrifices all sense of true scale and shape to present one thing with absolute clarity: the route. Every squiggle on the scroll represents a road. Every little building icon is a mansio, a government way station where officials could change horses and find lodging. The distances between these points are meticulously noted in Roman miles, turning a journey of hundreds of miles into a simple list of legs. Major cities like Rome or Antioch are shown with grandiose illustrations, while mountains and rivers are mere decorative symbols squeezed into the margins. Its genius is in its focused practicality. A courier carrying imperial dispatches did not need to know the exact contour of a coastline. He needed to know that from Milan, the road to Augusta Taurinorum was 123 miles, and that the next place to get fresh horses was at the station called Industria. The map was a linear narrative of travel, designed to be read from left to right, unfurled a section at a time on a table. It compressed 3 dimensions of rugged landscape into a 2-dimensional list, and then stretched that list into a long, navigable strip. This artifact stands as a powerful reminder that a map's form is dictated by its purpose. For the Roman administrator, the empire was not a collection of countries, but a web of connections, a system of control measured in paces and resting posts. The Peutinger map is that system made visible. It represents a parallel path in the history of cartography, one where wayfinding trumped representation, and where the most important measurement was not the size of the world, but the distance to the next safe bed. The Peutinger map compressed a continent into a list, but another culture mastered the ocean by learning to read its hidden grammar. In the vast Pacific, Polynesian navigators developed a cartographic language so abstract it appears as pure art. They built what we call stick charts, intricate frameworks of curved palm ribs bound together with coconut fiber, studded with small cowrie shells. To the untrained eye, they look like delicate geometric sculptures. But to a student navigator, they were a 3-dimensional textbook of the sea itself. These were not maps to be carried on a voyage. A canoe had no room for such fragile models, and the knowledge they contained was far too vital to risk losing to a wave. Instead, they were mnemonic training devices used on land to teach the complex, fluid dynamics of a specific ocean region. The master would sit with his apprentice, the chart between them, and trace the pathways of knowledge. Each curved stick did not represent a literal wave, but a stable swell line, a deep, rolling energy pulse that travels for thousands of miles unaffected by local winds. These swells are the ocean's steady heartbeat, bending around islands and refracting off submerged seamounts in predictable ways. A shell tide at an intersection marked not just an island's location, but the unique interference pattern its mass created in this web of moving energy. The student learned to feel these patterns through his body. Lying in the hull of his canoe, he would sense the subtle lift and fall, the crossing rhythms of swells from the north meeting swells from the east. The chart taught him what that specific intersection of sensations meant. If he felt this particular combination of rolls, the island of Majuro should be 2 days' sail off the port bow. It was a form of navigation called wave piloting. The navigator was reading a living, pulsing map written in the water beneath him, a map invisible to the eye but vividly clear to the trained senses. This knowledge turned the open ocean from a trackless waste into a structured, recognizable space. A swell bending around an atoll created a calm, shadow zone on its leeward side. The chart encoded where to expect that calm, a vital clue when searching for a low-lying island just at the horizon's edge. The meeting of 2 major current streams might create a telltale line of ripples or floating debris. The chart prepared the navigator for that signpost. These artifacts underscore a profound idea. Measurement and mapping can exist far beyond lines on parchment. For the Polynesians, the primary data was not visual but tactile and kinetic. They were measuring forces, not just positions. Their unit of measurement was the body's own sensitivity to pitch and roll. Their compass was the consistent direction of a deep ocean swell. Their chart was a physical model of hydrodynamic knowledge, a way to hold the behavior of the sea in your hands, study it, and commit its rhythms to memory. It was a science of patterns where an island was defined not by its coordinates, but by its unique signature in the symphony of the sea. This case reveals that the most accurate map is not always the most pictorial one. Sometimes the truest representation of a place is a diagram of how it moves, how it feels, and how its invisible forces will guide you home. A perfect map drawn on papyrus is only as permanent as the library that guards it. The meticulous science of Eratosthenes and the systematic grids of Ptolemy faced a peril far greater than any storm at sea, the fragile nature of human memory itself. For centuries, the primary guardians of this geographic knowledge were the great libraries, with Alexandria's legendary collection standing as the beating heart of the learned world. It was a universal archive where scrolls from Greece, Egypt, Persia, and India were copied, studied, and debated. Within its halls, the measurement of the earth evolved from a philosophical idea into a documented science. Yet these repositories were vulnerable. The famous library suffered damage over centuries from conflict and fire, its vast collection gradually scattering to the winds. Papyrus crumbled, ink faded, and unique copies of vital works were lost forever in moments of political upheaval or simple neglect. The unbroken line of transmission, the passing of a scroll from one scholar to the next, was a thread easily severed. This was the great paradox of ancient science, a towering achievement of logic resting on a foundation of perishable reed and fragile ink. The survival of this knowledge, then, became its own epic journey, one that depended not on instruments but on translators. As political power shifted in the Mediterranean and Europe entered what later scholars would call its medieval period, the torch of geographic and mathematical learning was carried forward in a different world. During the Golden Age of Islam, from roughly the 8th to the 14th centuries, centers of scholarship in cities like Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo became the new engines of intellectual preservation. Caliphs sponsored massive translation projects, gathering teams of scholars who worked with Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scribes to systematically translate the great works of Greek science, including Ptolemy's Geographia, into Arabic. This was not mere copying, it was active engagement. Scholars like al-Khwarizmi and al-Idrisi did not just preserve Ptolemy's coordinates, they critiqued and corrected them, adding new observations from Arab travelers and merchants who had journeyed further into Africa and across the Indian Ocean. They refined trigonometric tables, invented new navigational tools like the astrolabe, and produced world maps of stunning detail. In this vibrant intellectual culture, the Greek framework was not lost, it was expanded, tested, and woven into a richer, global tapestry of knowledge. This preserved and enhanced learning would eventually make its way back into Europe, but the path was slow and indirect. For centuries, Ptolemy's name was virtually unknown in European libraries. His seminal work existed only in Arabic copies, sitting in collections that were largely inaccessible to Latin-speaking scholars. The turning point came in the early 15th century, as the Renaissance stoked a fierce hunger for classical knowledge. A Byzantine scholar brought a Greek manuscript of the Geographia to Florence in the year 1400. It was a revelation. Here was the ancient world's most sophisticated cartographic system, perfectly preserved. The rush to translate it into Latin was immediate. When printed editions began to circulate later that century, equipped with newly engraved maps based on Ptolemy's coordinates, the effect was electrifying. European thinkers held in their hands a complete mathematical model of the world, one that simultaneously showcased the brilliance of the ancients and highlighted the glaring gaps in their own knowledge. The maps showed a world that ended at the shores of Africa, with a vast southern Terra Incognita, and an ocean that seemed tantalizingly narrow between Europe's west coast and Asia's east. This rediscovery did not close the book on exploration, it ripped it open. It provided the intellectual confidence and the specific eras that would drive the age of discovery. Columbus studied these maps, convinced by their underestimated Earth circumference that Asia was within reach. The very flaws in the preserved knowledge became catalysts for a new era of measurement. So the map we have been piecing together, from shadow sticks to star paths, is a map that almost vanished. Its journey from Alexandria to Baghdad to Florence is a story as crucial as any voyage of exploration. It reminds us that the measurement of the world was never a single act of genius, but a relay race across civilizations and centuries. Each link in that chain, a librarian saving a scroll from a fire, a translator puzzling over a Greek term, a printer setting delicate type for a coordinate, was an act of preservation as vital as the original observation. The knowledge of how to measure the Earth had to be rescued time and again from the silence that always seeks to reclaim the past. This fragile inheritance, once restored, did not just look backward. It gave the world a new direction, sending ships west into an ocean whose true size was the final, great measurement left to take. Gold and spices could not be traded without first trading knowledge. The most precise maps of the ancient and medieval world were not born in royal courts, but in the crowded harbors and counting houses of merchant guilds. For these traders, geographic information was a form of capital, as valuable as the silks in their holds and more powerful than any weapon. A secret shortcut, a newly discovered safe harbor, or an accurate chart of treacherous currents could mean the difference between a fortune and a financial ruin. This direct economic motive became one of the most powerful engines for cartographic precision in human history. Consider the vast, interlocking web of the Silk Road. A caravan master setting out from Samarkand toward China was not guided by a philosophical map of the world. He relied on itineraries and logs maintained by merchant families, documents passed from father to son, detailing every mountain pass, every oasis, every toll station, and every bandit-prone stretch. These were commercial intelligence reports, their accuracy verified by profit and loss. A mistake in distance could mean missing a critical market day. An error about a water source could doom an entire caravan. the pressure to get it right was immense and immediate, funded by the very goods being transported. This pattern repeated across the globe. In the monsoon-driven trade of the Indian Ocean, Arab and Persian merchants dominated the routes between East Africa, India, and Southeast Asia. Their ships carried pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and gems. Their mines carried something even more precious, a meticulously updated mental and written atlas of winds, ports, and hidden reefs. They developed the camel for latitude and wrote detailed Romani, sailing directions that functioned as living, commercial documents. A captain would amend his copy with a note about a new sandbar at the mouth of the Indus River or a shift in the local ruler's customs fees. Upon return, this intelligence would be pooled within the guild, refining their collective competitive edge. The most tangible product of this mercantile cartography was the medieval Portolan chart. These are not maps as we imagine them today, cluttered with inland cities and mythical beasts. They are stark, practical diagrams of the sea, drawn on vellum. Their coastlines are etched with an almost obsessive attention to the bays, headlands, and river mouths a sailor would actually see from his deck. A web of room lines radiates from central compass roses, not for decoration but for plotting courses. The names of ports are written perpendicular to the coast, crammed in like entries in a ledger. These charts were not made for kings to admire their domains. They were made for ships' masters to navigate between markets. Their creation was a specialized, lucrative industry in port cities like Genoa and Majorca, where cartographers worked directly with pilots, cross-referencing their logs and rutters to produce the most reliable tool money could buy. The funding for exploration itself was often a straightforward commercial investment. When Prince Henry, the Navigator of Portugal, sought a sea route to the source of West African gold and spices, he was not funding a purely scientific endeavor. He was backing a high-stakes venture to bypass the Arab middlemen who controlled the overland trade. Every new cape his captains rounded, every latitude recorded, every sketch of a coastline was a piece of commercial intelligence, a step toward monopolizing a lucrative trade route. The same drive would later propel Columbus, Magellan, and the East India Companies. Commerce provided the capital, the relentless incentive, and the practical feedback loop. A map's accuracy was tested not in a scholar's study, but in the stormy reality of a spice run. If it led a ship safely to a profitable port and home again, its data was validated. If it caused a wreck or a costly delay, it was revised. This constant, pressure-tested refinement, driven by the pursuit of profit, accelerated the measured expansion of the known world far more quickly than abstract curiosity alone ever could. The map, in the end, was a product for sale, and its value was determined by its ruthless, life-saving, wealth-generating precision. A merchant's chart was drawn for profit, but a king's map was often made for power. The parchment became a stage where a civilization could perform its deepest beliefs about the universe and its own place within it. This cultural lens did not just add decoration, it fundamentally warped the geometry, deciding what was true north, what deserved the center, and what should be left in the margins. In medieval Europe, the most celebrated world maps were not tools for travel, but diagrams for the soul. Known as Mappae Mundi, these elaborate works, like the Hereford Mappa Mundi created around the year 1300, were oriented with east at the top. This was not a navigational choice but a theological one. East was the direction of the rising sun, the location of the Garden of Eden, the source of divine light. Jerusalem, the site of Christ's Passion, sat at the very center of the circular world, a symbolic heart. The map's purpose was to present a spiritual encyclopedia of creation, from Genesis to Revelation. Its edges teemed with the monstrous races described by Pliny, not as geographical facts, but as moral warnings about the limits of the ordered Christian world. Rivers and mountains were squeezed in around biblical scenes and illustrations of cities. Distance and scale were irrelevant. The map measured importance, not miles. It was a visual sermon meant to be read and contemplated, a single image containing all of time, space, and sacred history. Its truth was not geographical but doctrinal. Across the world, Chinese cartography developed under a completely different set of principles. For the imperial bureaucracies of dynasties like the Han and the Song, the map was an instrument of statecraft and cosmic harmony. The world was often conceived of as a square earth beneath a round heaven, with the Chinese Empire, the Middle Kingdom, occupying the central, civilized square. This was not naive isolationism, it was a philosophical statement about order. The famous Hōkūleʻa map, carved in stone in the 12th century, presents China with astonishing administrative detail, showing rivers, roads, and provinces with careful accuracy. Beyond its borders, however, the lands of foreign peoples fade into brief, schematic notations. The map's primary function was to manage a vast empire, to tax land, move troops, and govern effectively. Its orientation often placed south at the top, aligning with the emperor's throne facing south, the direction of authority. Accuracy was paramount within the realm because good governance depended on it, but the lands beyond were of lesser cartographic concern unless they posed a threat or offered tribute. Here, the map measured control and cosmological alignment. These examples reveal a universal cartographic truth. Every line drawn is a choice, and that choice is never neutral. The medieval European monk prioritized salvation history. The Chinese imperial cartographer prioritized bureaucratic control and cosmic order. The Polynesian navigator prioritized the feeling of swells. Each culture measured what it valued most, and its maps became mirrors of that worldview. They answered the questions their society was asking. For the monk, the question was, where is God in creation? For the emperor, the question was, how is the realm ordered? For the merchant, the question was, how do I get there and back with my wealth intact? The act of measurement, then, was always the first step, but the act of representation was an act of interpretation. A coastline might be fixed by stars and geometry, but its place on the parchment, its size relative to other lands, its very name, were decisions made in the shadow of temples, palaces, and trading houses. The map was never just a picture of the world, it was a portrait of the mind that drew it. And as these many minds turned their gaze outward, a single, unifying vision began to emerge from the clutter of conflicting perspectives. A vision that would try to strip away all cultural bias and see the Earth for what it truly was, a solitary sphere adrift in the dark. Eratosthenes had provided a brilliant proof of concept, but the true size of the Earth remained an open question, a number to be refined by sharper minds and sharper tools. Over 1,000 years after his experiment in Alexandria, a Persian scholar named al-Biruni achieved a measurement of such elegance and precision it stands as a landmark of medieval science. His method was a masterclass in applied trigonometry, moving the observation from a flat plane to the peak of a mountain. While traveling in what is now Pakistan, al-Biruni selected a high summit overlooking a vast flat plain. From the peak, he carefully measured the angle of dip to the horizon, that subtle downward tilt where the curve of the Earth finally hides the distant land. This angle, combined with the known height of the mountain, which he calculated using a separate series of triangulations from the plane below, gave him everything he needed. He was essentially constructing a right triangle in his mind, with one side being the mountain's height, another being a line tangent to the Earth's surface from the peak to the horizon, and the hypotenuse reaching to the Earth's center. The dip angle was the key. Using the trigonometric relationships he knew so well, he could solve for the length of that hypotenuse, which was the Earth's radius plus the mountain's height. Subtract the mountain, and the planet's true curvature was revealed. His calculated value for the Earth's circumference was within 1% of the modern figure. This was not just an improvement on Eratosthenes, it was a conceptual leap. Eratosthenes had used a difference in latitude, a comparison between 2 points on the sphere. Al-Biruni used a single point of elevation and the geometry of sight itself. He did not need a second city hundreds of miles away. He only needed one mountain, a clear view, and a mind capable of translating a glance toward the horizon into a number for the world. This progression from shadow sticks to mountain peaks tells a deeper story than just improving accuracy. It shows the evolution of the mathematical toolkit itself. Geometry gave way to trigonometry, a more powerful language for describing triangles in three-dimensional space. The quest was the same, to quantify the planet, but the methods grew more sophisticated, more portable, and more universally applicable. A scholar could now, in theory, measure the Earth from any high place with a clear vista, turning local geography into a global laboratory. This relentless refinement, spanning cultures and centuries, underscores a profound truth about the ancient and medieval world. Their pursuit was not satisfied with a good estimate. It was driven by a conviction that the universe operated on mathematical principles, and that human reason, armed with careful observation, could decode those principles to reveal the fundamental dimensions of reality. Each new calculation was a testament to that faith, a quiet declaration that the world was not a mystery to be feared, but a puzzle to be solved with numbers and logic. And as these measurements converged on the true size of the Earth, they revealed a startling corollary. If the planet was this large, then the vast, documented expanse of Europe, Asia, and Africa might not be all there was. The mathematics of curvature began to whisper of unknown spaces, of other lands that could fit upon the sphere's immense surface, waiting beyond the edge of every map. The mathematical elegance of Al-Biruni's mountain peak measurement revealed a world of precise curvature, but the maps drawn from such knowledge were never perfect mirrors of that sphere. They were human documents shaped by brilliant methods, but also by the very real fog of uncertainty that clung to every step of the process. Consider the simple act of measuring distance. On land, the Roman mil passus, 1,000 paces, was a standard unit, yet one soldier's stride differed from another's. A pace on flat pavement was not the same as a pace up a muddy hill, and the fatigue of a long march would inevitably shorten that stride over time. Distances were often recorded not in these imperfect paces, but in days of travel, a unit even more fluid. A day's journey for a lightly laden messenger on a good road could be 30 miles, while for a merchant's ox cart climbing a mountain pass it might be 10. When a cartographer in Alexandria received reports from travelers, he was translating a variable, subjective experience into a fixed line on his parchment. The potential for cumulative error was enormous. The problem grew exponentially at sea, where the lack of reliable longitude twisted geography itself. Without a way to fix their east-west position, navigators could only estimate how far they had sailed along a parallel of latitude. A captain might know he was on the correct latitude for his destination, but had he sailed far enough to reach it, or had he already passed it by? This uncertainty warped coastlines on the grandest scale. Look at Ptolemy's map of the world. His Mediterranean is remarkably accurate, shaped by centuries of coastal sailing where landmarks were always in sight. But his depiction of Asia stretches far to the east, and his Indian Ocean is landlocked by a vast, speculative southern continent. These were not wild guesses, but logical conclusions based on the reports he had and the tools he lacked. He knew the approximate latitude of India and of China, but with no way to measure the longitudinal span between them, he had to estimate the distance. Overestimating that distance made his map wider, which in turn made his calculated Earth circumference seem smaller, creating a cascading series of distortions that made the Atlantic Ocean appear deceptively narrow. Errors also multiplied through the fragile chain of transmission. A map was a treasure copied by hand over generations, each copyist was a potential point of failure. A tired scribe might misplace a dot representing a city by a fraction of an inch on the parchment, an error that on the ground could represent 50 miles. When translating names from Greek to Arabic to Latin, an unfamiliar word for a river or a mountain range could be misheard, misspelled, or attached to the wrong feature entirely. The famous Hereford Mappa Mundi, for all its spiritual grandeur, places the mythical Golden Fleece in the Caucasus Mountains while locating the actual city of Rome with only vague proximity. This was not carelessness, it was the result of blending centuries of sources, some factual, some literary, all filtered through a medieval Christian worldview that valued symbolic truth as highly as geographic fact. A feature might be placed not where it was, but where tradition said it should be. These limitations were not failures of intellect, but honest reflections of the world as it could be known. A cartographer worked with the best information available, which was often fragmentary, second-hand, and unverifiable. He faced the puzzle of connecting points described in days of travel, reconciling conflicting sailors' tales, and filling vast blanks with educated speculation based on the logic of the day. When we see a strange creature drawn in the margin or a continent bent out of shape, we are not looking at ignorance. We are looking at the boundary of contemporary knowledge, a line drawn with the tools at hand. Their achievement is not diminished by these errors, it is magnified. They built a measured world from a cascade of estimations, faithfully recording both what they knew and what they could only wonder about, leaving behind a record not of a perfect Earth, but of the magnificent, striving human attempt to comprehend it. The world we navigate with a tap on a screen is built upon a framework millennia old. Our modern coordinate grid, the invisible net of latitude and longitude that guides every digital map, is a direct inheritance from the ancient quest to measure a sphere. Those early calculations with shadow sticks and star paths were not just clever tricks, they were the first steps toward a universal language of location, a language we now speak fluently through satellites. The global positioning system in your phone does not invent a new way to find you. It refines the oldest method of all, celestial navigation. Instead of sighting Polaris through a camel, a GPS receiver locks onto signals from multiple satellites, each one a fixed, artificial star in a known orbit. By calculating its distance from several of these points, your device performs a form of hyper-advanced triangulation, solving for your precise position on the Earth's curved surface in a fraction of a second. The underlying geometry, the essential problem of finding a point from known angles and distances, is identical to that used by the Roman surveyor with his dioptra, just executed at the speed of light. Even the challenge of flattening the globe persists. Every digital map you view relies on a chosen projection, a mathematical formula to translate the spherical Earth onto a flat display. Whether it is the familiar Mercator projection used for web maps or the more specialized ones for navigation apps, each is a direct descendant of the conic projections described by Ptolemy, a digital solution to the ancient cartographer's eternal dilemma. The legacy is also etched into our landscapes. The property lines of farms, the routes of highways, and the borders of nations were often first established using chains of triangulation, a method perfected over centuries that began with measuring a single, careful baseline. Modern surveyors use laser theodolites and satellite data, but the logical scaffold of their work, building a network of triangles across the terrain, is the same geometric principle that allowed Eratosthenes to reason his way to the size of the planet. This continuity is a powerful reminder. Our hyper-accurate digital understanding of the world did not appear from nowhere. It is the culmination of a long conversation between human curiosity and the physical universe, a conversation that started with a philosopher watching a ship vanish over the horizon and a librarian measuring a shadow at noon. The ancient mapmakers did not have our tools, but they gave us the most important thing, the foundational questions and the logical framework to answer them. They built the conceptual cathedral within which all modern geography resides. Every time a delivery driver finds an address or a hiker checks their location on a trail, they are benefiting from a collective project of measurement that began under the open sky, with simple tools and towering ambition, proving that the most enduring technology is not made of silicon, but of insight. The true test of any ancient technology is not in its description, but in its performance. For decades, scholars debated whether the epic voyages described in Polynesian oral histories were even possible with the tools of the time. Could a culture truly navigate thousands of miles of open ocean using only the stars and the sea? The answer arrived not from a library, but from the ocean itself, in the form of a reconstructed double-hulled canoe named Hōkūleʻa. In the 1970s, a team of cultural practitioners and navigators, led by the Hawaiian artist Herb Caen and guided by the last surviving master of traditional Micronesian navigation, Mapmaker, built the vessel using ancestral designs. Their goal was audacious: to sail from Hawaii to Tahiti and back, a round trip of over 5,000 miles, using no modern instruments whatsoever. No compass, no sextant, no charts, and certainly no global positioning system. The crew would rely entirely on the celestial star paths, the reading of ocean swells, the flight patterns of birds, and the subtle signs of distant land. It was an act of experimental archaeology on a planetary scale, a living laboratory to test the very foundations of ancient wayfinding. The success of that first voyage, and the many that followed, was a revelation. It proved these methods were not just poetic legends or lucky accidents. They were a complete, robust, and repeatable navigational system. The navigator, standing on the open deck for weeks on end, maintained a mental map of the canoe's position by dead reckoning, constantly updating it with nightly star sights and the daytime feel of the swells beneath the hull. He watched for specific seabirds, knowing their maximum flight range from land, turning their presence into a shrinking circle of probability on his mental chart. He learned to detect the faint, sweet smell of flowering plants carried on the wind from islands still far below the horizon, and to observe the specific way clouds might stack or glow greenish over shallow lagoons. Each of these clues was a data point, a measurement in a non-numerical language. The Hōkūleʻa did not just sail to Tahiti, it sailed through a barrier of modern disbelief, demonstrating that the human senses, trained by generations of knowledge, could perceive and process environmental information with a precision we had forgotten was possible. These voyages taught us that the skill required was immense, a total immersion of mind and body. A navigator could not simply look up a star in a book. He had to know its entire rising and setting arc for that season, and the sequence of stars that would follow it through the night. He had to sleep in short bursts, waking to check the swell direction by the feel of the canoe's motion. His concentration was his primary instrument, and any lapse could mean drifting dozens of miles off course in a single day. The experiments showed this was not a solo act, but a cultural technology. Knowledge was passed in songs and chants, in stories that encoded sailing directions, and in the rigorous apprenticeship where an elder, like Mapmaker, would teach a younger navigator to see the ocean as a textured, legible space. The tangible proof offered by Hōkūleʻa and similar projects around the world is profound. It confirms that the settlement of the Pacific, one of humanity's greatest migratory achievements, was not a haphazard drifting of lost canoes. It was a deliberate, measured expansion, guided by a science of patterns written in the natural world. These modern voyages closed the loop between ancient theory and practical reality, allowing us to finally measure the true scope of our ancestors' understanding not in abstract degrees, but in the salt spray and star light of a successful journey home. That voyage of the Hōkūleʻa was not just a test of technique, but a testament to the human spirit behind it. This is the quiet truth of every ancient map we have explored. Each one was born not from an abstract process, but from the focused mind and steady hand of an individual. The cartographer stood at a unique crossroads, required to master a constellation of seemingly opposite skills. He had to be a scientist, rigorously applying geometry to the curve of the Earth. He had to be an astronomer, reading the silent clockwork of the stars. He had to be a historian, sifting through travelers' tales for fragments of truth. And finally, he had to be an artist, translating all that abstract data into a visual form that could inform, inspire, and even awe. This synthesis is what makes these works so enduring. Think of the anonymous monk bent over a parchment in a cold scriptorium, illuminating a mappa mundi. For him, the task was an act of devotion. His careful brushstrokes drawing the walls of Jerusalem were as much a prayer as they were a geographic statement. His choice to place a mythical creature at the edge of the world was not an error, but a deliberate inclusion from the authoritative texts he cherished. His map was a portrait of his entire worldview, drawn with patience and reverence. At the other extreme, consider the scholar like Ptolemy or Al-Biruni, engaged in work that spanned decades. Their labor was one of relentless calculation and synthesis. Picture Ptolemy in the Library of Alexandria, surrounded by scrolls from distant lands, cross-referencing conflicting reports of distances. He would spend years reconciling these accounts, adjusting coordinates by fractions of a degree, striving to build a system so logical it could outlast him. This was not a quick sketch. It was a lifetime's dedication to the idea that the world could be understood through number and reason. Then there is the courage of the source, the traveler whose raw observations fed the mapmaker's work. The merchant who risked the Silk Road to bring back a description of a mountain pass, or the sailor who survived a storm and logged the shape of a new coastline. Their contribution was born from direct, often perilous, experience. They measured the world with their own footsteps and sailcloth, driven by curiosity, necessity, or the simple desire to see what lay beyond the horizon. When we look at an ancient chart, we are not looking at a sterile document. We are looking at the physical evidence of human curiosity. Every carefully inked line represents a decision, a moment where the cartographer weighed evidence and made a choice. Every embellishment in the margin, whether a sea serpent or a drawing of a king, reveals what that culture feared, valued, or dreamed of. The precision of a Portolan chart's room lines speaks to a mind obsessed with practical utility, while the symbolic geometry of a Chinese imperial map reveals a mind focused on cosmic order and control. Behind the parchment is the heartbeat of the person who made it. The late nights, the sore eyes, the frustration over a missing measurement, the triumph when a calculation finally aligned with a traveler's tale. These maps are, in the end, profound acts of communication. They are one person's attempt to take the immense, bewildering complexity of the world and compress it into a form that others can see and use. They are a bridge thrown across time and space, from the mind of the mapmaker to the hand of the navigator, from the curiosity of one generation to the learning of the next. They remind us that before any instrument was invented, the primary tool for measuring the world was the human capacity for wonder, deduction, and the stubborn desire to leave a mark saying, "I was here, and this is what I saw." The Mediterranean was not the only cradle of cartographic genius. Across the planet, in isolation from Greek geometry and Roman roads, other cultures developed their own profound languages for measuring space, each shaped by the unique demands of their environment and worldview. Take the Marshall Islands of the Pacific, where the greatest challenge was not land, but the vast emptiness between lands. We have already seen their stick charts, but their true innovation was conceptual. They mapped not the static positions of islands, but the dynamic energy of the ocean itself, the refraction of swells around atolls, the interference patterns of currents. Their charts were hydrodynamic models, a science of patterns where an island was defined by the unique way it disturbed the sea's rhythm. This was a map for feeling, not just seeing, turning the human body into a sensitive instrument attuned to the planet's pulse. Far to the west, in the river valleys of ancient China, the challenge was of a different scale, administering a massive, centralized empire. Here, mapping was an act of statecraft. As early as the Qin and Han dynasties, officials conducted large-scale grid-based surveys. They would establish a master square, then subdivide the land into smaller, regular units, meticulously recording topography, waterways, and arable fields. The famous maps found at Mawangdui, dating to the 2nd century before the Common Era, show this precision. They are strategic military documents detailing mountain passes, garrison locations, and troop capacities with an eye for control and logistics. For the Chinese imperial court, an accurate map was a tool of governance, taxation, and defense, measuring the realm to better rule it. Meanwhile, in the dense rainforests and high plateaus of Mesoamerica, mapmakers wove together geography and cosmology into a single sacred fabric. The Aztec Codex Fejeverimea, for instance, is a stunning blend of calendar, ritual guide, and world map. It depicts the cosmos as a great cross, with the sacred center of Tenochtitlan at its heart, and the 4 cardinal directions, each associated with specific gods, colors, and divine forces. Space and time were inseparable. A journey was not just a physical movement, but a passage through layers of spiritual significance. The Maya, too, created maps in their codices that charted both the territories of city-states and the pathways of deities through the underworld. For them, to measure the land was to trace the footsteps of the gods, embedding every mountain and spring within a living, storied landscape. This global panorama reveals a fundamental truth. The Greco-Roman tradition, with its focus on celestial geometry and terrestrial triangulation, was one brilliant answer to a specific set of questions. The Marshall Islander, the Chinese surveyor, and the Aztec priest were asking different questions, and thus invented different tools. One sought to navigate a fluid wilderness, another to administer a fixed territory, and a third to align human life with cosmic order. Each solution was a masterpiece of adapted ingenuity. Seeing them side by side, we no longer witness a single line of progress, but a dazzling constellation of human intellect, a testament to our species' universal drive to comprehend our place, whether that place is a rolling wave, a surveyed province, or a sacred mountain at the center of all things. A blank space on a map is not an empty place, it is a question. For centuries, the edges of the known world were labeled with 2 Latin words, Terra Incognita, unknown land. But these were more than cartographic terms, they were psychological states. They represented the territory of fear and fantasy, where the mind populated the void with sea serpents, edge-of-the-world waterfalls, and races of monsters. The slow, meticulous work of measurement did something extraordinary to this mental landscape. It did not just fill in the blanks with lines, it filled them with logic. Each time a coastline was charted to its true end, each time a mountain range was given a measurable length, each time a star's path was linked to a specific latitude, a piece of the world's mystery was converted into knowledge. The monster retreated, and the marketplace appeared in its place. A coastline that was once the lair of a legendary beast became, on a Portolan chart, a series of bays and river mouths suitable for anchorage and trade. The distance that was once measured in fearful tales of a months-long journey became a number, a calculable risk. This transformation from the mythical to the measurable is one of the most profound shifts in human history. It changed the very questions a culture asked. Instead of wondering what horrors might be out there, merchants and monarchs began to ask how long it would take to get there, what goods could be found, and what it would cost to bring them back. The map evolved from a repository of legends into a ledger of opportunities. Consider the difference between the medieval Mappa Mundi and a Portuguese Portolan chart just 2 centuries later. One is a spiritual diagram meant for contemplation, its edges crowded with symbolic warnings. The other is a stark, practical tool, its margins filled with notes on currents and the prices of spices in different ports. The world had not changed, but humanity's mental model of it had undergone a revolution. The act of measuring created a new kind of courage, one rooted not in blind faith, but in calculated probability. This shrinking of psychological distance fostered something else, a new sense of scale. When you believe your village or your kingdom is the entire world, your identity is intensely local. But when you see that kingdom rendered as a small part of a vast continent on a spherical globe, your sense of self expands. For Europeans studying the rediscovered works of Ptolemy, this was a dizzying experience. They saw their familiar lands positioned within a global grid, flanked by immense continents of Africa and Asia. It fostered a nascent sense of being part of a larger, interconnected system, a regional identity defined in contrast to, and in potential commerce with, other far-off regions. The map became a mirror, but one that reflected a much bigger room. Ultimately, this psychological shift is what ignited the age of exploration. It provided the essential fuel of ambition. A horizon that is quantifiable is a horizon that can be crossed. Columbus did not sail because he was uniquely brave. He sailed because his maps and calculations, however flawed, suggested a specific, finite distance to Asia. He believed the ocean was a measurable space to be traversed, not an endless abyss to be feared. The promise was no longer whispered in myth, it was inscribed in geometry. This new relationship with the planet was fundamentally active. The world was no longer a stage upon which humans simply lived out a preordained story. It was a puzzle to be solved, a resource to be assessed, a network of routes to be optimized. The measured map invited participation. It was an implicit call to action. To look at it was to see not just where you were, but where you could go, and what you might gain or lose by going there. It turned the planet from a backdrop into a protagonist in the human story, an entity that could be understood, engaged with, and ultimately changed. This transformation in the mind, from terror of the unknown to calculation of the possible, may be the most significant measurement our ancestors ever made. A master's knowledge was only as valuable as his student's memory. These complex systems of measurement, from celestial navigation to geometric surveying, did not survive by accident. They endured through a deliberate and demanding culture of teaching, a silent curriculum passed from one generation to the next without a single textbook. The true map of the world was first drawn in the mind of an apprentice, and the process of transferring that map was as intricate as the knowledge itself. In the vastness of the Pacific, a young Polynesian navigator began his education not at sea, but on land, inside a special structure called the Whale or canoe house. Here, his master would construct a mental model of the cosmos. Using a circle of stones or coral pieces laid out on the floor, he would teach the star compass. Each stone represented a specific star or constellation as it rose from a distinct point on the horizon. The student would sit in the center, the master pointing to each stone in sequence, reciting the name of the star, the island it pointed toward, and the season for its use. Night after night, this mental star map was reinforced until the student could close his eyes and see the entire rotating dome of the night sky, a celestial calendar and compass fused into one. The knowledge was embedded in chants, long rhythmic poems that listed star sequences, swell patterns, and the landmarks of invisible islands. To forget a line was not just an error, it was a potential death sentence for a future crew. This oral tradition was a living library. its contents safeguarded by the sheer necessity of perfect recall. Across the world, in the bustling port cities of the Mediterranean, a different kind of apprenticeship unfolded. A boy hoping to become a Portolan chartmaker would enter a master's workshop as a young teenager. His first years were spent on the tedious, essential groundwork. He would learn to prepare the vellum, stretching and scraping the calfskin until it was perfectly smooth. He would grind pigments for ink, learning which recipes produced the most durable black for coastlines and the brightest red for the compass roses. He might spend months simply copying place names from older charts onto practice sheets, his hand trained to write in the precise, perpendicular script that crowded the coasts. Only after mastering these crafts would he be allowed to assist in the actual drafting, perhaps inking in the room lines that radiated from the compass roses, a task requiring a perfectly steady hand and a ruler held firm. He learned by watching, by doing, and by absorbing the master's judgments which sailors report to trust when two accounts of a coastline conflicted. How to adjust the curvature of a bay based on a newly arrived captain's log. The workshop was a closed guild, and its methods were trade secrets, protected because the accuracy of its products was the source of its reputation and wealth. This transmission of skill was not a gentle education, it was a total immersion. The medieval master mason teaching geometry to his apprentices on a cathedral site, the Arab astronomer tutoring a pupil in the use of the astrolabe, the Roman agrimenser showing his son how to align the groma for centuriation, all followed a similar pattern. Knowledge moved from the experienced hand to the watching eye, from the reciting voice to the listening ear. It was practical, iterative, and deeply personal. Techniques were encoded in ways that bypassed the need for widespread literacy. Mnemonic songs helped sailors remember the sequence of ports along a coast. Rhyming couplets held the rules of thumb for estimating distance traveled. The very structure of a tool, like the knotted string of a camel, was a physical teaching aid, each knot a lesson in latitude. This emphasis on oral and practical teaching highlights a crucial truth. Measuring the world was never a solitary genius act. It was a cumulative, collective discipline. Each generation received a body of knowledge, a set of solved problems, and was tasked with preserving it, testing it against new experiences, and refining it. A master navigator's star compass contained the observational wisdom of countless voyages before him. A chartmaker's coastline was a palimpsest of hundreds of sailors' sightings, filtered through the critical judgment of generations of craftsmen. The apprentice was not just learning a skill, he was being entrusted with a legacy. His successful education meant the line of knowledge remained unbroken. The hard-won understanding of the Earth's shape and space would not fade back into Terra Incognita. He became the next link in a chain of observers that stretched back to the first person who looked at a shadow and saw a measurement, and forward to those who would one day look at a clock and see a longitude. The map may be drawn, but the story is never fully complete. For all the brilliant techniques we have uncovered, the historical record is still punctuated by tantalizing silences, moments where the specific methods of ancient masters have faded into the fog of time. These gaps are not failures of history, but invitations. They are the enduring mysteries that remind us our understanding is a living conversation, always open to new evidence and new interpretations. Consider the Minoans, that sophisticated Bronze Age civilization of Crete, whose palaces and vibrant art speak of a people deeply connected to the sea. Their frescoes show elegant ships, and archaeological finds across the Aegean prove they traded widely. But how did they do it? They left no written sailing directions that we can decipher, no surviving navigational instruments. Did they rely on a detailed oral tradition of star paths specific to their island-dotted world? Did they use early versions of the camel, crafted from perishable wood that has long since returned to the earth? Or did they possess a form of celestial knowledge, perhaps tied to their intricate bull-leaping rituals and architectural alignments that we have yet to fully comprehend? Their maritime mastery is an accepted fact, but the precise mechanics of their navigation remain a beautiful, silent puzzle. Half a world away and millennia later, another colossal maritime mystery sails through history. In the early 15th century, the Ming Dynasty Admiral Zheng, he commanded a treasure fleet of hundreds of ships, some reportedly over 400 feet long, on 7 epic voyages across the Indian Ocean, reaching the coast of Africa. The scale is almost unimaginable. Historical accounts describe the fleet carrying tens of thousands of men and navigating with the aid of star charts and compasses. But what did those star charts actually look like? What specific methods did their pilots use to determine longitude on such long hauls? While they certainly used magnetic compasses and likely adapted Arab navigational knowledge, the exact how of their transoceanic wayfinding is not fully detailed in the surviving records. Some scholars speculate they may have used a technique involving measuring the altitude of certain stars in conjunction with water clocks, a method later described in Chinese texts, but applying it to the dynamic, rolling deck of a massive treasure ship is a different challenge altogether. The voyages of Zheng he stand as a monumental achievement, yet the fine-grained details of their daily navigation are whispers on the wind, urging further research and discovery. These are not isolated cases. They represent a broader truth that for every Eratosthenes whose method we know, there may have been a dozen brilliant practitioners whose techniques were never written down, or whose records were lost to fire, decay, or conquest. Are there entire schools of measurement, whole geometries of the earth that flourished in now silent cultures and vanished without a trace? Could the mound builders of North America or the ancient cultures of the Sahara have possessed sophisticated methods for aligning their structures to celestial events or measuring vast distances across their landscapes using systems we have not yet recognized? The possibility is both humbling and thrilling. It means that the history of measuring our world is likely richer, more diverse, and more ingenious than the fragments that have survived can ever tell us. This is precisely why the field remains so vibrantly alive. Historians, archaeologists, and even modern sailors engage in experimental archaeology, building replicas of ancient ships to test sailing capabilities, or using computer models to simulate ancient star paths. Each new shipwreck discovered on the seabed is a potential time capsule, possibly holding the physical remains of a navigator's toolkit. Every newly translated line from a crumbling manuscript might contain a forgotten clue. These open questions are not frustrations, they are the engine of curiosity. They force us to look at the familiar evidence with fresh eyes and to appreciate the depth of ancient ingenuity not as a settled fact, but as an ongoing revelation. The very gaps in our knowledge are a testament to the complexity of the past, a silent acknowledgement that our ancestors' understanding of their world was often so seamless, so integrated into daily practice, that they felt no need to write down every single step. The greatest secret history may still hold is that the most profound measurements were not always made with instruments, but were carried in the mind, in stories, and in a deep, unspoken communion with the sky and sea, waiting for us to learn how to listen for their echoes. That legacy of measurement is written across the world we inhabit today. The curve of a modern highway follows a line first plotted with a dioptra. The satellite in orbit confirms a calculation first made with a gnomon's shadow. We stand on the shoulders of those patient observers who turned philosophy into geometry, and geometry into a map. Their true triumph was not merely in the accuracy they achieved, but in the audacious belief that made it possible, the conviction that the human mind could comprehend the scale of its own home. They transformed the terrifying unknown into a series of solvable problems, replacing monsters with meridians and fear with fathom lines. Every time we effortlessly find a location on a glowing screen, we are using the final, digital expression of a quest that began under the open sky, with simple tools and a boundless desire to know. So the next time you glance at a map, pause for a moment. See not just the lines and names, but the centuries of curiosity they represent. Think of the sailor feeling the swell, the scholar measuring the angle, the cartographer choosing which story to trust. Their world, built from observation and deduction, is the foundation of our own. It is a reminder that before we could ever hope to chart the stars, we first had to learn the magnificent, patient art of measuring our own Earth.